Coming up on this special edition of Colonial Crossfire, the midterm elections. What happened? What do they mean for 2020? And Jeff Sessions is fired. Joining us on the left, Keith Nagy and Zachary Nosenchuk. And on the right, Caroline Hakes and Josh Kuttner. And I'm your moderator, Michael Schnell. From the GWTV studios in Washington, D.C., this is Colonial Crossfire. Welcome to this special edition of Colonial Crossfire. I'm your host, Michael Schnell. Today, we're expanding our team, bringing in more thoughts and perspectives to focus on all things midterms, the results, contentious races, possible recounts, and, well, what happened? The House flipped blue and the Senate stayed red. What will the next 2 years of a divided Congress look like? And do these outcomes tell us anything about the 2020 presidential election? With the 2018 midterms behind us, the 2020 season is here. Our student panel is here to discuss this and more. On the left, Keith Nagy, a freshman from Topeka, Kansas, majoring in political science. Keith is the Foggy Bottom representative for the GW College Democrats and a policy intern at the National Audubon Society. And Zachary Nosenchuk, a freshman from Shaker Heights, Ohio, majoring in political communication. Zachary is the former youth council advisor to Representative Marcia Fudge and a member of the GW College Democrats. And on the right, Caroline Hakes, a sophomore from Marietta, Georgia, majoring in international affairs. Caroline is currently the Director of Public Relations for the GW College Republicans. And Josh Kuttner, a sophomore from Somerset, New Jersey, majoring in political science. Josh is the campaign chair for the GW College Republicans and the Assistant Director of Editorial Services. Thank you guys all for joining us today. After much anticipation, the 2018 midterms came and went, with respected and qualified Democrats and Republicans facing off against one another. The results, nothing short of interesting. The Democrats took control of the House, and the Republicans kept their majority in the Senate, making for a possible gridlock situation in Washington. So, who won the midterms? Democrats gained 32 House seats as of today, but did they achieve their blue wave? Republicans strengthened their control in the Senate, but was President Trump right to say they achieved a victory? Let's break things down. Let's start off simple. Caroline, what are your thoughts on how your party performed in the midterm elections?
I would say that we definitely defied history, as we said. You know, traditionally the the incumbent president's party do lose seats, but the Republicans were able to hold control and actually make those gains in the Senate. There were points in the election cycle where people believed that we would lose control of both houses. The House, while unfortunate, wasn't unexpected. I think we're going to see the Republicans make an agenda shift and focus on things that they can get done in the Senate, like confirming those judicial nominees and any cabinet shifts that there will be.
Josh, you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I will just say, Democrats, all credit to you. You guys, won the House. We don't do moral victories on our side. Congratulations. But I will say, if you look at where the gains were made, you see a lot of seats picked up in New Jersey, very near and dear to my heart, but not a place where the Republicans have performed well. Virginia, same story. About 4 seats in Pennsylvania due to redistricting alone. And so I don't think it's due to a massive shift to the left. The gains were about even with what you'd expect historically. We're trading a slim House majority for a few seats in the Senate. That gives us a Democratic foil to have Speaker Nancy Pelosi in there going forward. And I look forward to seeing what the new Congress brings.
Zachary, Keith, your thoughts? How'd your party do?
Well, I think last Tuesday was absolutely incredible. We did have some disappointing races when it came to Senate and gubernatorial races. But I think Democrats have a lot to be thankful for. First and foremost, we did take back the House of Representatives. That was our core objective going into this midterm cycle. Secondly, I think we did incredibly well on the state level, especially in gubernatorial races where we picked up 7 governors' mansions. That's the most we've made in 36 years, so that's awesome. Also, more than 370 state legislative seats, so that's going to be big going into the redistricting process after the 2020 census, which is going to be big in the fight against gerrymandering heading into the next decade.
Zachary, anything you'd like to add?
I agree. I think we did very well. I think the House of Representatives was always gerrymandered towards Republicans, and the fact that we were able to win that with 32 seats is pretty amazing. And in these suburban seats that you mentioned in Virginia and New Jersey, these were districts that were won by Republicans New Jersey districts that were won by Donald Trump in 2016, and we still won those races. And yeah, we did lose Missouri, Indiana, and North Dakota, but the demographics of those places were definitely not shifting towards Democrats, but the whole nation seems to be. There's no demographic group that's shifting towards Republicans. So I think that's very good news for Democrats in the future.
Now, voter turnout skyrocketed throughout. Record number of people went to the polls, but especially from the 18 to 20 to 29 range, I think they're saying right now that about 10%, there was about a 10% increase in that age range. What does this say about the American constituency? Zach, we'll go to you first.
I think it's amazing for both parties because the youth should be turning out, and it helps Democrats, but it also helps Republicans. I think it should, if more people participate in our democracy, we see what America actually thinks. And I think that this is a good increase. I think we can do even better in increasing voter turnout among minority communities, but also among youth, because I think it really, the youth-backed candidates, we see in these races, they accomplish things. They work across the aisle, and I think if youth turn out, whether they're conservatives or liberals or moderates, they are going to do a lot to American democracy, and they're going to do good things.
I'll go ahead and piggyback off of that. You know, I think people overlook the fact that the president is pretty popular among conservatives in the 18 to 29 category, especially in these red states or states that are trending red. And I think that that bodes well for the future of our party as well. You know, people say that we're on our way out with the baby boomers, but I don't believe that that's the case.
I'd like to add there, Generation Z is now coming in. That's where a lot of us are coming into the electorate. And I feel like Generation Z is going to be a conservative generation. The Democratic leadership in the House, although a lot of the constituencies, you know, they've picked up a lot of young people, their leadership is quite old. We've got a lot of young, exciting candidates, like Nikki Haley, for instance, who are going to really inspire a lot of young conservatives moving forward.
Now, voter suppression has been a large talking point in this year's election. Allegations of such acts have been made in both Georgia and Florida. Here's Georgia Governor candidate Stacey Abrams on the issue.
This is a man who had someone arrested for helping her blind father cast a ballot. He raided the offices of organizations to stop them from registering voters. That type of voter suppression feeds the narrative, because voter suppression isn't only about blocking the vote. It's also about creating an atmosphere of fear, making people worry that their votes won't count.
So Josh, we'll start with you. Do you think voter suppression affected the races in Florida and Georgia, and do you think that we should be focusing more on stopping this voter suppression?
Well, I'm not quite too familiar with the intimate details of each situation, but I feel like I can speak pretty confidently for my party when I say that any serious allegations of voter suppression or voter fraud by either side should be fully looked into, and offenders should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I am a little hesitant on some of the accusations that are going towards Mr. Kemp as towards voter suppression. I think there's a clear government interest in making sure the voter rolls are kept up to date. And in Florida, I am quite concerned about that Broward County supervisor and her behavior. So I'd like these matters to be fully investigated.
I think voter suppression is a huge issue, and it's hard. I'm sure both parties are somehow responsible, but it's hard to believe that Republicans, especially in these races in Florida and Georgia, haven't influenced voter suppression in suppressing minority communities from not voting. Across from my house in Cleveland, a few miles down, there's a sign that in a predominantly African American community that tells people your vote doesn't matter, and it was funded by a Republican state committee. I've seen so many examples of Republicans funding efforts, either directly or indirectly, to suppress the vote of minority communities in these states.
I think I've seen a lot of outreach to minority communities in these southern states, especially in Florida. You know, Governor Rick Scott, who was the senatorial candidate in Florida this cycle, really made an effort to reach out to the Latino community. I think that's a constituency that had been forgotten a lot by Republicans. You know, you assume it's a wash. And Governor Scott was able to tap into that Republican constituency, bring out those conservative Cuban voters.
Now, we'll stay in Florida. Florida Senate and gubernatorial races are right now going to a forced recount. What do you think the outcome of these recounts? Will be after they go through, look at all the stats, and figure things out? Keith, what are your thoughts?
Right, so going into election night, it seemed like Andrew Gillum had a pretty steady lead in the polls. He was leading by about 3 to 5% in most polls, with the margin of error within about 3 to 4%. So we were confident of Andrew Gillum's victory there, which does give us a little bit of hope going into this recount process. I'd brace for the worst, but it does look like Bill Nelson might be able to pull out a narrow win in the senatorial race if indeed the Broward County provisional ballots do come in the way we expect them to. Either way, though, it does look like it's going to be a very close race for both contests.
I'm going to have to disagree on this one, unfortunately. I feel like for Senate, you got about 14,000 votes separating them, about 33,000 at the gubernatorial level. I'd be very hesitant to think that, absent some major error, that either of these races are going to change hands. And I think it speaks to two things. One, the fact that Florida is trending the Republicans' way. And two, the weak candidate selection on behalf of the Democrats. You selected a gubernatorial candidate who's too far left for the state. Bill Nelson's been in office for quite some time, not too familiar with what he's done in the state. A lot of constituents were disappointed in him and preferred Governor Scott's leadership, and I think the outcomes fully showed that.
It's interesting that you pointed out Gillum as being too far left and not Ron DeSantis as being too far right for Florida. Him saying these comments like monkey this up with Andrew Gillum. I personally, if I had voted in the Florida primary, I might not have voted for Andrew Gillum, but I still think that these comments made by Ron DeSantis and his alliance with the president that is so strong and is basically his only pitch to Florida voters was definitely not an example of where Florida, which is still a swing state, is on the map.
DeSantis was specifically referring to monkeying things up by voting for a candidate with far left policies. I don't think there was a racial undertone there. I don't think he insinuated that because Gillum was black, it would be a mistake to vote for him.
And if he were to, we would have wholeheartedly condemned that there's no place for racism within our party.
We do have to acknowledge, though, that race was a major factor in this election because there were racist robocalls targeting Andrew Gillum during the election cycle. So we still do need to acknowledge that Andrew Gillum was unfairly targeted.
And very despicable calls in Georgia as well, and I was very happy that the Republican Party condemned these calls wholeheartedly.
These weren't paid for by a mainstream Republican group. And I think that's something that needs to be emphasized more, and that our party needs to do a better job of emphasizing, and your party needs to do a better job of acknowledging.
So if we look at Florida as a whole, we're going into a recount right now on the Senate and gubernatorial level. And if we look back to 2000 with the Bush v. Gore election, we went into a recount then. What do you think this says about Florida as a whole and their state legislature? Caroline, we'll start with you.
Well, they probably should take a look at their election infrastructure and see why things seem to be so in the balance in two major elections within 2 decades.
Anyone else have anything to add on that one?
I think I agree. I think there needs to be a revamp of voting systems. And as we saw today, the House Democrats said their first priority to pass was a bill that would improve voting systems nationally. And we don't know if that'll get passed. But I do think that in the Florida state legislature, they should be working on making sure these elections are fair and that they're well done.
I think that needs to come on a state-by-state issue. You know, the Constitution says that elections are under the jurisdiction of states, the conducting of elections. I think that putting that on the national level creates just more government, and I think that you need to invest in improving things at the state level because it's all politics is local, you know, and that's really true. You think about how little is going to get moved through Congress in the next 2 years. You need to emphasize change and reforms to election systems at the state level.
Also, to add on top of that, I just want to note that Florida voted in favor of a ballot initiative that is going to give voting rights to former felons who have already served their sentences. That's going to play a major role, especially when it comes to the 2020 presidential election. And I think it is going to give the edge to Democrats in future election cycles.
Now, to finish off the block, I want to toss you guys one more question. What do you think the biggest upset was in this election cycle? Zachary, we'll start with you.
I think for me, it was the fact we saw Laura Kelly in Kansas, which was a big deal for me. And I also think that for me, an upset, and the polls showed it very tied, was the governor's race in my state between Mike DeWine and Richard Cordray. I think I expected it to be very close, but I didn't expect Mike DeWine to win as much as he did. And that was an upset on the Republican side, and I can admit that that definitely was an upset that they had. I think there was upsets on both sides, but it sort of shows how turbulent our political era is right now, about how we are really never sure who's going to win these elections, and how we really have to work harder at going into communities where we usually don't go into to sort of understand the systems there and get a better sense of how our democracy is working.
Keith, biggest upset?
I think the biggest upset was that Democrats performed so well in rural areas. I myself am from Kansas, so I was very ecstatic to see that Laura Kelly is now the governor-elect of Kansas. We are now the first state with 3 female governors in our history, so we made history there. We also elected Sharice Davids out of Kansas' 3rd District. She will be our state's first LGBT representative. And along with Deb Haaland from New Mexico, she will be this nation's first Native American woman in Congress. So even in places in the Midwest where we're not traditionally competitive, Democrats had an outstanding showing on Tuesday.
We'll go down the line. Caroline, you next.
Biggest upset for me would have to be Mike Braun against Senator Joe Donnelly of Indiana. The outside groups came in spending tens of millions of dollars in ads and tried to end the race by Labor Day, as is their strategy with big money, and they just couldn't get it done. They tried to hit Mike Braun on issues that he had a response for every single one, and Joe Donnelly tried to play that everyman kind of in the middle that really didn't work with the votes that he had to take. So I think Republicans got really lucky on that one. And additionally, the polls had it wrong all along. They predicted, a toss-up race with things ultimately trending in Donnelly's favor, and we just didn't see that with such a wide margin going for Braun.
Josh, last thought?
Well, it may not count as an upset because it was kind of predicted. I think the loss of the moderate wing of the Republican Party was certainly a devastating blow. You see losses like Representative Carlos Curbelo in Florida 26, a great young leader in the party. Leonard Lance in New Jersey 7, very near and dear to my heart. The fact that according to the bipartisan center, the Lugar Center's bipartisanship index, 6 of the top 10 bipartisan Republicans either lost or had to retire. I feel like it's going to be a negative thing in terms of drafting legislation and ultimately to the detriment of our country.
And we'll have to end our segment there. But after this, we'll discuss the effects of the midterms and how these outcomes will impact the future of Washington and the U.S. Stay tuned.
You guys ready?
Let's do it.
Yeah?
Let's do it.
Okay,
Sure.
ready?
Let's go.
Welcome.
Wait, do you want me to go or?
I thought I was going.
No,
No, you go. You go. You go.
Sean and Mike
Yeah,
want
well,
you guys.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, ready?
Welcome to G.
I thought I was supposed to start.
I thought I was gonna go first.
I thought.
Here comes Parker.
Come on, guys. It's not that hard, all right? It's just one line. All right. You guys know the line.
Welcome to GWTV. You can visit us at gw-tv.com.
See, that wasn't so bad.
Welcome back. Now that we've sorted through the outcome of the midterms, it's time to analyze what these results actually mean. We now have a divided Congress filled with several new senators and representatives. Will we see gridlock or bipartisanship? Many say that the 2018 elections were a referendum on President Trump's first 2 years. What does this mean? And did the midterms serve as a litmus test for 2020? Many experts are looking at the recent races to make predictions for the upcoming presidential election. Keith, we'll start with you. Do you think there'll be significant gridlock, or do you think we'll be able to see some bipartisanship in Congress?
I'm going to take the cynical approach. I believe there is going to be more gridlock in Washington, given that both chambers moved in different directions this election cycle. I think it's pretty safe to say that what gets passed through the House is almost definitely not going to get accepted by the Senate unless it is a bipartisan piece of legislation.
What would that bipartisan piece of legislation be, do you think? I
think that protecting our election integrity, specifically committing to cybersecurity, that I think should be something that both of our parties agree on. I think that healthcare reform is something we both want to work out. A lot of people are unhappy with the Affordable Care Act, and there are certain provisions that are not perfect. We'll agree to that. But, I'm from a bipartisan household. My dad's a Republican, lifelong Republican. My mom's a Democrat. So I firmly believe that common ground can always be found, even when it's difficult.
What does the right think, bipartisanship or gridlock?
I'm going to go with the gridlock answer as well. I don't think we'll see much landmark legislation get passed on either side. I think the Senate will stick to confirming judicial nominees and any cabinet shifts. We already have seen a little bit of shakeup post-midterm. And I think, at the very basis, they can maybe fund the government. That's really not a guarantee either.
We did see a little bipartisanship here. We agreed on having gridlock on both sides.
I mean, at the end of the day, though, politics comes down to, what your constituents are calling for. And while I do think, President Trump himself would be amenable to perhaps a criminal justice reform deal, something on the environment, infrastructure for sure, I just don't think that the Democrat leadership that was elected was elected to work with President Trump. They were elected to oppose him. I think we're going to see lots of presidential harassment, lots of investigations, and it's going to be an interesting time.
I think there actually might be some common ground here. I think an issue that I lobbied Congress on was paid family leave, and President Trump has talked about possibly working on that. And there's definitely some Republican senators like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski who have talked about that as an important issue that we can work on bipartisan. I do think, though, the idea of presidential harassment is something that the Republicans can't be talking about right now because when Senator Mitch McConnell said our goal was to make Obama a one-term president, I think we're not worried. Right now, the issue is not the harassment of the President of the United States, who is one of the wealthiest and most privileged men in America. I think the issue is working together as a country.
Josh, do you think that the first 2 years were a referendum on President Trump's presidency?
Well, sure. Politics is increasingly nationalized, and voters definitely, unfortunately, I believe, were voting nationally rather on local issues or state issues. But that gets back to it. I don't think it was necessarily a major loss for the Republican Party at the governorship level and state legislative races for sure. But we saw losses in the House right on line with historical precedent, and we actually picked up in the Senate something that's quite rare. So if it is a major referendum on Trump, I mean, we'll see how it turns out in 2020. It wasn't devastating.
What do you guys think on the left?
I'm going to actually take the opposite approach. I don't know if this was entirely a referendum on President Trump. I believe that in a lot of individual House races, they were focusing on those bread and butter issues like healthcare reform, like tax reform. But I say that mostly so that Democrats, they don't get comfortable with themselves in 2020. By no means is 2020 going to be easy for Democrats in the House, the Senate, or the presidential race for sure. So I believe that we cannot take this as a message that President Trump is definitely going to get kicked out of the White House in 2020. So we need to go full A game from here on out.
And Republicans can't really sit by either. We've seen kind of troubling signs in states like Texas and Georgia that are traditionally, safe red states with the outstanding performance, though he did come up short, of Beto O'Rourke in Texas against Senator Ted Cruz, and with, this Georgia governor's race still yet to be determined, but Stacey Abrams, put up a valiant fight. I think we're going to see some of these states that seem more red come into play. Florida, for sure, has always been a swing state, will continue to be a swing state. And then I think on the Democrats' end, I think you have to worry about states like Ohio. Ohio is trending more red with this upset from Mike DeWine. I think people tend to lump Ohio in with those more blue Midwestern states like Wisconsin or Michigan, and I think it's becoming more of a Missouri or an Indiana.
I think I agree. I think Democrats can learn from the tactics of someone like Gretchen Whitmer or Tony Evers in Wisconsin in translating that to Ohio and Iowa and some of these other Midwestern states that are definitely not working as well in Democrats' favor because the demographics are not leaning our way and we're not doing a good enough job campaigning in the places that we need to in these states. People like Richard Cordray didn't do enough in this election, I don't think, to really reach out to other people and work hard and spend a lot of money. And I think that Democrats, I think this also is a wake-up call for us, too.
So we're going to switch gears quickly. With the House majority switching from Republican to Democrat, it's time to nominate a new Speaker of the House. Right now, former Speaker Nancy Pelosi is the front-runner. Here's Pelosi on her candidacy in an interview with CNN's Chris Cuomo.
What is your level of confidence that you'll be the Speaker of the House?
Total.
100%.
100%, yeah.
Zachary, do you think that Nancy Pelosi should be the next Speaker of the House? If so, why? If not, who do you think is suitable for the position?
I think I'm going to say something that might anger some people on the panel, but absolutely. I think she should be the next Speaker of the House. Does she have faults? Absolutely. But she's, in the end, I think a lot of the attacks made on Nancy Pelosi were sexist. And she's the highest ranking woman in American government. She was as Speaker of the House, she did a lot for healthcare reform, and I think that she definitely has problems, and she's definitely not the most popular figure. But I think when we're talking about popular figures trying to attract people to the party, we're talking about 2020 presidential candidates. Nancy Pelosi is not running for president. She's running for Speaker of the House, which is a job about bringing people together. And I think that she's pretty good at that. And she's also pretty good at fundraising. And I think that a lot of the people who don't want her haven't found a replacement for her, which means that I think she's sort of someone that we need that's necessary. And I think if we want to change up the Democratic leadership, we should start kicking out the people like Steny Hoyer, and Jim Clyburn and all of the people in these other Democratic leadership positions, because they're also older as well, but they haven't done as much as Nancy Pelosi has for the country.
Josh, I see you shaking your head. Care to respond?
I just think the idea of these being sexist attacks on Nancy Pelosi is a little bit uncalled for. I think the attacks on her are pretty valid, given that she supports such liberal California policies. But that being said, I do think you hit the nail on the head when you said that no one else has really come to the forefront and who's going to challenge her. I think Tim Ryan put up a great fight in 2016. He'd be a great guy. But I don't see anyone coming up right now. And I think to her credit, she is a very good politician. She's good at what she does, and she's earned her right.
I will say, I think that I read an article recently that said she could come up a few votes short of that 218 she needs to become speaker. With some candidates that did end up winning some of these contested House races, partially owing to the fact that they said they weren't going to vote for Pelosi for speaker. I think it'll be interesting to see if she can build that coalition, if she can cause those people to flip their votes, because 2020 is just around the corner and those people will be up for re-election again. And I think that it'll be an interesting dynamic for them to have to go back to their districts and tell their constituents who voted for them on that promise, because I'm sure there were some who did, why they reneged on that promise.
If not Pelosi, who would you put up?
I don't know.
Fair answer. Keith, your thoughts?
I love Nancy Pelosi. I think that she is a talented legislator. Nobody knows how to whip votes like Nancy Pelosi. But I think that there are a host of other candidates in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is so talented right now. There's other candidates that make up or represent the diversity of our party better than Nancy Pelosi. Barbara Lee, Joaquin Castro out of Texas. These are people who represent not just the racial diversity of the Democratic Party, but also the youth of the Democratic Party in the case of Joaquin Castro. So, Nancy Pelosi will do. I'm just saying there's other options out there, and we as a party do need to consider that.
So we are officially in the 2020 election season. It's kind of a frightening thought for some people, but the Democrats really haven't put anybody up yet. So I'm going to ask all you guys, who do you think that the Democrats will or should put up? And do you think that somebody will challenge President Trump? Do you think they should? And if someone does, who would you think that person would be? Caroline, we're going to go to you first.
On the Democratic side, I think that Kamala Harris is one of the most formidable nominees that the Democrats could put forward. She does have pretty leftist policies, but she does a good job of coming across as that moderating voice, that adult in the room. She's extraordinarily accomplished and very articulate, and I think that she could build her name ID and then be a viable candidate. She would need someone more centrist, maybe a Midwestern kind of Democrat like Sherrod Brown, maybe more to pull that ticket back and really broaden that appeal. And as far as a primary challenger to the president goes, I'm sorry, but if you don't like the way the president talks, that's not reason enough to primary him. I really don't think that Republicans can be that unhappy with the policy changes that have happened in this country over the past 2 years and what could be to come.
I'd love to get everyone's take on this. Josh, you next?
As far as on the Democratic side, I personally am not a fan of Kamala Harris at all. I think taking lessons from 2018, we see the Democrats' strength would be taking back the Midwest. I think Joe Biden from Scranton, originally would be a phenomenal choice to appeal to moderates. My parents might vote for Joe Biden. He is someone with broad appeal, although he may be a little older, someone who's not as young and exciting and hip. I do think he would be a great choice and one of the only ones that could take down the president. Primary challenge, I don't see anyone who's willing to go who could beat President Trump nationally. I have trouble believing that Kasich could win a primary in the South or the West. I think Jeff Flake, also not a viable option. So I feel I'm fairly confident to say that President Trump will be our nominee in 2020.
Zachary, what's your thoughts?
I think that there probably will be some sort of a challenge to the president in the Republican primary. I don't think it'll be viable. I think it could be Jeff Flake or John Kasich. I think that President Trump will win the primary. He seems to have a pretty good control over his party. And as for the Democrats, I think there are so many good choices we have. I'm inclined to talk about Sherrod Brown, who I think is an extraordinary example because he won on the other Tuesday, and despite the fact Republicans won at the same time. But I think that Joe Biden, paired with someone like Kamala Harris or Tulsi Gabbard, someone more progressive, more diverse, together, they could really pitch the American people not just an anti-Trump message, but a message that's good for America.
Keith, quick thought?
I absolutely agree with what you said about the Republican primary. I think that either Jeff Flake or John Kasich will run. I don't think it's going to be viable. On the Democratic side, huge fan of Kamala Harris. I think Kamala Harris and Sherrod Brown would be an excellent pick. Or even if Joe Biden does get the nomination, I think he should put Kamala Harris on the ticket. Either way, I know for certain there is going to be a woman on the Democratic ticket in 2020. I'm 100% sure of that.
Amy Klobuchar is another good one, Midwestern Democrat
Yes.
and a woman.
Minnesota. And Tammy Baldwin's even a good one out of our senator from Wisconsin. So that kind of diversity representing that the Democratic ticket is going to be very important in 2020.
But I mean, also, do you hear the problem right now? How many names have we thrown out just in this 3-minute segment? You're going to have the same problem that the Republican side had. It's going to, although we did end up winning, it may tear some divisions in your party. And it'd be interesting to see who's able to take advantage of it being such a wide field.
I think
We're running out of time, but I do want to be able to get one more question, and I hate to cut off the debate. But what do you guys think that the 2018 outcomes mean for 2020? Josh, we'll go back to you.
Like I said, the path to the presidency runs through the Midwest. I think if the Democrats put up someone like Kamala Harris, who's just simply not palatable in the Midwest, in my opinion, that President Trump will coast easily to the presidency once again. I think if they put up someone like Joe Biden or Sherrod Brown, you could see some trouble, especially if the economy starts to stagnate.
Caroline, what does 2018 say about 2020?
I think it says that we Republicans have some trouble in those traditionally red states that are trending more purple these days.
Keith, next.
Right, so the big story of 2016 was that Democrats were having troubles in the Rust Belt, like Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan. In 2018, we did exceptionally well in races in Michigan and Wisconsin, got pretty close in Iowa. So Democrats are indeed making gains, especially in suburban areas amongst those voters who actually voted for Trump back in 2016.
Zachary, a quick last word.
I think it means that the progressive left of the Democratic Party is not going to be the people who are going to kick Trump out of the White House.
All right, and that will be the last word on that. But after this break, it's rapid fire. Stay with us.
Universities like George Washington play a critical role in hosting debate and discourse on events of the day.
The right answer is not to refuse the other. The right answer is not to say, get rid of this religion. It's not part of us. It's wrong.
I think that the story of America is the story of race. So when I think of the questions that I'm asking or the stories that I'm going to write, I'm thinking, okay, well, what are we learning about our country?
Well, I think the likelihood of him being indicted is close to 100%. There was a lot of hurdles that had to be cleared in order for that to happen.
One of the reasons that Donald Trump is president is because there is such a frustration with the way that Washington functions.
Sympathy is one thing, but empathy is the language of recovery, and it's something that's without a doubt instilled into every person that's in recovery.
It's never lead with the positive, it's always lead with the perceived negative.
Well, that is part of the problem. I mean, I actually would agree with you on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One of the things that we have seen that is most under siege in this country is the notion of civil discourse, and we here at GW, among other things, very much want to stand for that.
This is truly an only at GW moment.
Our panel joins us now for Rapid Fire, some quick answers to some quick questions. The day after the midterms, President Trump forced Jeff Sessions to resign, calling on Sessions' Chief of Staff Matthew Whitaker to become acting Attorney General. Whitaker is an outspoken critic of the Russia investigation, and reports say that Special Counsel Robert Mueller is writing his final report of the Russia probe. Caroline, we'll ask you first. What do you think these two developments mean for the future of the Russia investigation?
Well, if he's writing his final report, then it's wrapping up, which I think is what everyone wants to happen. Now, I will say that, if things continue to persist and that report takes time, I don't think that Whitaker, who has criticized the investigation, should be acting Attorney General and have power over this investigation. I think he should recuse himself. That said, I think that the president really needs to expedite the process to nominate someone who is, maybe independent of this previous Justice Department, this previous administration and his campaign. I think an example would be someone like a Trey Gowdy or a Kelly Ayotte, people who have actually outspokenly criticized the president, but both have excellent legal backgrounds and would make fantastic AGs, not just, to wrap up this Russia investigation, but also to make progress on things like criminal justice reform and immigration.
Josh?
Yeah, I think I hope that we see the Mueller investigation fully play out. I don't want any interference at the executive level. And in terms of replacing Sessions, I want someone with a strong record as a prosecutor, like my personal hometown favorite, former Governor Chris Christie.
Keith, your thoughts?
Right, so I think that this is once again just a blatant obstruction of justice by the president. We saw that he got in trouble last year with the firing of James Comey, director of the FBI. The Mueller report is very imminent, the release of it is, and I think President Trump should be afraid of that, especially now that House Democrats are going to be able to subpoena documents relating to the investigation. As to who will replace Jeff Sessions, I think that Chris Christie is a good compromise candidate, but I don't know if Donald Trump is exactly going to go with that.
Zachary?
I think I fully agree. I think that the appointment of Whitaker is just him trying to obstruct justice in this case, but I do think that Kelly Ayotte would be a really fine choice, especially from her record as Attorney General of New Hampshire, as a senator. She's a bipartisan person, and we need someone who's very independent of the Republican campaign and who's able to sort of really help America's criminal justice system.
Moving on, thousands of asylum seekers are traveling to the U.S.-Mexican border. President Trump has expressed that he wants to change asylum-seeking laws before the caravan arrives, and law enforcement has been placed at the border. Keith, we'll start with you. Do you think the U.S. should grant asylum to these immigrants?
Well, first off, I want to point out that this is simply the president misusing our military forces for his own political gain, which is completely inappropriate and a really tragic thing of a president to do. I do believe that we do need to work harder in this country to build a road to U.S. citizenship. These amnesty seekers are, of course, refugees fleeing from very violent war scenes. So I believe that in some instances, with some vetting process, of course, that we do need to accept these people, mostly of whom are women and children.
Zachary?
I think that we do need to institute vetting in this situation because I think Republicans can often say that Democrats want to let everyone in, and that's not true at all. I think we have a very good vetting process, and we should continue improving it. And if we vet these immigrants and we decide that they're good people, they should absolutely come into America because, as Keith said, they're coming from these terrible situations, and we have the resources, and we will grow when we have more immigrants. That's just what economic studies show.
Josh, what are your thoughts?
As far as granting asylum, while I do feel for these people, especially the women and children who are just coming from horrible circumstances, I'm unsure if the current laws allow for asylum based on fleeing poverty. I think the legal terminology is interesting. And I do agree that it was a little hyper-politicized by the president, as many issues are by both sides. But I do think it was important to point out that the Republicans are having a strong message as to how to address immigration. Meanwhile, I don't really know what the Democratic Party stance is on the caravan, and I'd be interested to hear what the party's opinion is.
Caroline, finish it off.
So I think what your issue is here with the caravan is that people are, saying that they're just going to come into the United States. I think that they need to take a step back and they need to realize that that is no one's entitlement to come into this country. You need to apply for asylum, apply for citizenship. And the president should focus on sending the kind of resources that we need, not the military, but more judges and lawyers to process these claims and, determine who should be coming into this country.
Now, following a contentious post-midterms press conference marked by CNN's Jim Acosta continuously asking questions and refusing to relinquish the microphone, President Trump suspended his White House press credentials. Just recently, CNN filed a lawsuit against President Trump in response to this move. And protesters, led by Smash Racism DC, protested outside Fox News' Tucker Carlson's house, yelling racist, threatening slurs, and throwing objects at his home. In addition, President Trump has continued to use the phrase fake news. Josh, we'll start with you. What do you think these events say about the First Amendment and freedom of the press?
Well, in terms of the Acosta incident, I think Jim Acosta was pretty rude and disrespectful. That's kind of his MO. Unfortunately, the president doesn't have much moral ground to stand on there as he conducts himself quite unprofessionally at times. But I do think it was reasonable given Acosta's interruptions and continued diatribes about his personal opinions and refusal to give up the microphone to temporarily suspend his pass. I hope they give it back to him soon. And as far as Tucker Carlson, just attacks on the press in general, it's a key freedom. I really, one of my least favorite things about this president is how he says the enemy of the people. I think it's harmful to civil discourse, and we're going to need some leadership on that.
Caroline?
I think with respect to the Acosta situation, it's worthwhile pointing out that he asks these same, petulant questions over and over, is attempting to elicit the sort of response. I think that the negative conduct really goes both ways here. Acosta is just grandstanding in that press room, and the president is just eating it up and responding exactly how he wants him to. With respect to Tucker Carlson, I think that that's a sign that the First Amendment is alive and well if these people believe that they can go to someone's home and harass them. And with respect to, tamping down that rhetoric against the media, I really don't know that it's going to come from the president. I don't think that we can ask for that anymore. I think that it has to come from, journalists on, CNN, Fox, MSNBC saying, we are going to not give him what he wants, which is this sensationalized coverage.
Keith, what's your take?
I think that most of these instances represent the degradation of morality under this administration. Just incivility in general has increased, and that's due in large part for both sides. We do love rooting for our home team, but I was raised under the principle that just because you're a Republican does not make you my enemy, just as you being a Democrat does not necessarily make you my friend. I hope we're still friends. But I think we need to get back to that as America, and hopefully after this 2020 election cycle, we will be able to as a country.
Zachary, we'll toss it to you next.
I actually read the lawsuit that he put up because I was very curious, and my law professor sent it to me. And I was reading through it, and I think it's very valid. I think what it proves is this whole idea that this president's war on the press is very dangerous, but also he does have the right to take away press credentials, and that's just how it's worked. Obama took away press credentials, Bush did. Presidents do this, and I don't think Jim Acosta is necessarily right in what he did. But I think the bigger issue here is that if we need to keep showing this country that we are willing to stand up and we're willing to keep speaking and keep talking. And I think this president's attempt to tamper down the press is not working, and it is terribly dangerous for democracy.
On October 27th, 11 people were killed when a man opened fire at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Less than 2 weeks later, a man shot and killed 12 people, including a law enforcement official in a bar in Thousand Oaks, California. Zachary, with the new Congress in session and 2 recent mass shootings, do you think that gun control will come to the forefront of the conversation?
I certainly hope it will. I think that gun control is an incredibly important issue. I think I was definitely particularly affected by the Pittsburgh shooting. I'm Jewish. My dad's a rabbi, and he did a lot of work for gun control and about gun violence. And immediately after this shooting, he said, it's a horrible incident, and as Jews, we need to talk about it. But it's also, we can't say that it can't become a part of the conversation, because if we had stricter gun laws, if we had background checks, sensible gun reform. We're not talking about taking away people's guns. It's just sensible gun reform. Then this might not have happened. So I think that it needs to be a priority for Congress. Just very sensible gun reform, that bipartisan, something like the Manchin-Toomey Amendment, something that is very bipartisan and reaches across the aisle, because even Republicans can agree that these sort of shootings are outrageous and that some reform can do things to help our democracy.
Keith, what's your take?
Well, first and foremost, I just want to, my heart goes out to the people of Pittsburgh and the Jewish community in general. But before that, my heart went out to Sandy Hook, Aurora, Charleston, Parkland, and we just see each and every month, each and every week, and now each and every day, we see just innocent people being slaughtered, and we can't tolerate that anymore. I hope we are both realizing now that this is no longer a liberal issue or a conservative issue. This is an American issue. And I think that both sides, because of their partisan bickering, have led, unfortunately, to a tremendous loss of life. So going into this new congressional session, I hope that is a priority of both parties.
Caroline?
I don't think you'll see people on the right getting behind any kinds of, bans, restrictions. I think that you need to reinforce things that are in place, like background checks and, really taking a look into people's criminal records and mental health. And I think, looking at social media, this shooter in Pittsburgh had given indication, on social media, granted it was a lesser platform, that he, had these anti-Semitic thoughts and that he, wanted to commit violent acts towards people. I think that there needs to be a real focus as well on, really nipping that anti-Semitism, that hateful rhetoric, towards minorities, different religious groups in the bud. And I think that that needs to come from our highest officials tamping down their, vitriolic rhetoric, whatever it may be.
Josh, we'll toss it to you.
Yep, I stand with Zach on this as a Jewish American as well. The Pittsburgh attack hit close to home. It doesn't get a lot of attention, but national background checks do exist. And actually, during this last Congress, the Fix Nix bill was a great attempt at trying to fully fund this and make sure this is enforced. I would encourage both sides of the aisle to continue to do this work. I know soon-to-be Senator-elect Rick Scott did some great work in Florida following the Parkland shooting. And I hope that there will be sensible bipartisan agreement on this.
And with that, we end our debate here on Colonial Crossfire. Caroline Hakes, Josh Kuttner, Keith Nagy, and Zachary Nosenchuk. Thank you so much for joining us today on this midterm special edition. When we come back, Jessica Nix has our debate fact check. Stay with us.
So who do you think you're going to take in the first round this year?
I don't know. I think I'm going to take Peyton Manning.
He's still playing?
I saw him in a commercial recently. I'm pretty sure he is.
Oh yeah, it's the Nationwide commercial.
Yeah. Guys, in the new studio, come on. We don't have a football team.
I guess no one told him to call this football season.
Welcome back. During our panel discussion, a team of fact checkers monitor our debate. Jessica Nix is here to fill us in on what we missed. Jessica?
Thanks, Michael. Our debaters came prepared for today's debate with very few errors. However, some false claims need to be addressed. First, Republican Josh Kuttner stated that moving forward, Nancy Pelosi will be Speaker of the House. While it is predicted that she will be nominated for Speaker, it has not been officially announced that she will be nominated. Josh Kuttner also mentioned that 14,000 votes separated the candidates in the Florida Senate race between Republican Rick Scott and Democrat Bill Nelson. However, 34,000 votes separate the candidates. On the Democratic side of our debate, Keith Nagy said that the first Native American woman elected to Congress was from North Dakota. Although it is true that the first Native American woman was elected, in reality, two were elected, one from Kansas and one from New Mexico, but neither from North Dakota. Keith Nagy also said that the Democratic Party was having trouble winning votes in the Rust Belt. Although this claim is true for the Republican wins of two gubernatorial races in Iowa and Ohio, this claim is not completely factual because there are recent Democratic victories in the Senate for Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin, states that were pivotal in Trump's 2016 victory. That's all for the fact check team. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Jessica. All right, well, that's all the time we have for this special edition of Colonial Crossfire. Be sure to check us out online at www.gw-tv.com and follow us on Twitter and Instagram and like us on Facebook. For all of us here at GWTV, I'm Michael Schnell. Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us. We'll see you right back here next time.